Hey everybody, it's Pastor Scott with Lathrop First Christian Church here in Lathrop, Missouri, and I am joining you. This video is going live on Monday, December 8th, and 2025. So if you're watching it on that day, great. If you're watching at a different time, it's important that I tell you it's going live on Monday, December 8th, and the reason is because within the Catholic tradition, this is the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. It's one of the holy days of the Catholic calendar. And I bring that up because I wasn't raised Catholic. I'm not Catholic. Not in big C Catholic. I'm a little C Catholic in Universal Church as a whole, but that's a whole nother conversation. But when I hear the word Immaculate Conception, what do you think? I know what I thought for a long time. When I heard Immaculate Conception, I was thinking, well, it was because Jesus was conceived in a virgin, and that's the Immaculate Conception. That Jesus' conception was because, and it was immaculate, because Mary was a virgin. However, that's actually not the dogma, the theology of the Catholic Church. In fact, they celebrate the Feast of Immaculate Conception because they are remembering Mary's conception when she was conceived. Not when Jesus was conceived, but when Mary was conceived. And the idea behind this, the theology behind this, is Mary had an immaculate conception. She was conceived immaculately without original sin. Therefore, she could have a baby named Jesus, and Jesus would not be tainted with original sin. And I didn't learn that until a few years ago, probably now maybe 5 years ago. But I just thought that was interesting because the whole time, anytime I heard Immaculate Conception, I was thinking of Jesus's conception, that Jesus was conceived by a virgin named Mary. And I bring this up because there's a lot of times where we can have a conversation with somebody and you can say the same words, but the individual hears a totally different thing based on how they was raised or the theology that they've been taught. And it can, at times, we can gloss over things and it sounds like we're all on the same page. But once you start realizing sometimes there's different definitions, we can start having some debate. Now, what do you believe and why do you believe it? What do you mean when you say this or that? And I come back, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking of 2 Timothy chapter 2, and I'm going to read verses 23 and about halfway through verse 25. And the Apostle Paul writing to Timothy, he says this, "Have nothing to do with stupid and senseless controversies. You know that they breed quarrels. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kindly to everyone. An apt teacher, patient, correcting opponents with gentleness." So as I read this, one, I'm convicted on a lot of levels when it comes to that passage. But when I read this passage initially, at the beginning, it says, look, do nothing, have nothing to do with stupid and senseless controversies. They breed quarrels. And as I think about that, I think sometimes we refuse as a church people, as Christians, to debate what other people believe, to have those conversations. And I think sometimes it's important to have those conversations, and it's not stupid and senseless. It's about what is your faith and working out your faith. And you can do that in a way that is patient, that you can be gentle. You can be kindly to everyone. It just so happens we live in a world where if you don't agree with the other person, we get mad, yell and scream and storm out, and we unfriend them on Facebook. But really, how are we going to learn if we do not test our own beliefs and we don't test others and we have those conversations and those debates? Again, we don't have to do so in a manner that is quarrelsome or divisive, but in a manner that is teaching and lifting up. So I gave you the example of the Immaculate Conception. There's other words as well that in theology or church life you might hear, and you have one definition, and your friend might hear the same word and have a totally different understanding of what that is. Original sin would be one of those terms, and that actually plays in really well with the Immaculate Conception theology. And in fact, that's why, little sidebar, Eastern Orthodox, that is very Catholic, but not Catholic. There's a division there. But Eastern Orthodoxy, they do not celebrate the feast of the Immaculate Conception. But on the next day, which will be Tuesday the 9th, they will have a feast about Mary, about her being the vessel that carries Jesus. And so, high view of Mary, but because they have a different understanding of original sin, they don't include the Immaculate Conception in their theology. And so I think those are interesting things, and you gotta have those conversations. Well, why is this? Why is that? What does it mean to have original sin or not to have original sin? And what does that mean when you hear that Jesus is the new Adam? If Jesus is undoing the things that Adam did, do we still have original sin? How does that work? What does that mean? Another saying that, honestly, it wasn't until I came here 7 years ago that I learned this one, that there was a different understanding of what the term meant. Once saved, always saved. So every time I hear that, once saved, always saved, I think more of the Calvinistic idea that you cannot, under no circumstances whatsoever, lose your salvation. You can be truly and fully saved, and once that happens, you cannot never, ever, ever lose your salvation. Now, that's what I've always thought the phrasing once saved, always saved meant. I found out in many conversations since I've been in Lathrop that sometimes once saved, always saved, once saved, always saved is really a pushback against the idea that after you sin, you lose your salvation. And so your whole life is, okay, I'm saved. I've now sinned. Okay, I've lost my salvation until I pray and I apologize and ask for forgiveness from God. And once He gives that to me, I'm saved again. And then I sin. Oh, I'm not saved again. And so some look at this more as the eternal assurance that you cannot ever, ever possibly lose your salvation. And others look at this as saying it simply means if your faith is still in Christ, you are still saved, even if you sin. Okay? And so learn something. And I'm not saying what you need to decide on when it comes to once saved, always saved. I'm just saying it's another example. The idea of limited versus universal atonement. When Jesus died, did He die for everyone? Or did He die just for the elect? And this becomes a big debate And there's merit to the debate, but oftentimes these are things we could argue about and we can end up saying basically the same thing. But we're in an argument because some people want to talk about a limited atonement and some people want to talk about a universal atonement. And just briefly, limited atonement is, okay, he only died for those that are elect. He did not die for all people. And yet then you get to universal atonement, and the other side says, well, he died for all people, but it's only effective for those that put their faith in Jesus. Now, I'm giving you a little bit more of a higher articulated definition of those two, and we could go a lot higher. I don't think I have to. But we can have those higher distinctive conversations, but if we're just talking about atonement, we can start really in conflict with one another, and we're saying almost the same thing. Not that there's not a distinction, but we're a lot closer than sometimes we think we are. The last one I have on here is an example I use a lot, and that's baptism. When someone tells me about baptism, or they want to be baptized, or I've been baptized, my initial response, my initial understanding will always be that they were a believer that confessed and they were immersed in water. It was how I was raised. It's the theology I still have. But if you are coming from a tradition that you were not a believer at the time, you were an infant at the time, that's usually the distinction. Don't want to get too much into that whole thing. But if you were baptized as an infant by sprinkling, and I say baptism, very likely you're not thinking believer's immersion baptism, unless you know me and know my theology on that. And so sometimes we can talk about baptism and we can use the same words, but our minds are in two different locations. And so I just encourage you, when you're having these faith conversations, not as a way to start a fight, but as a way to have clarity in the conversation, but also as a way to test beliefs and have that debate with another individual, make sure you actually know what the other person's saying, even though you're both using church words and the same church word. You might have a totally different definition of this. And that's one of the reasons. So now I'm going to transition to something else. That's one of the reasons I love that the Supreme Court of the United States now puts all of their arguments on audio. And I love listening to it. I love listening to them to go back and forth, because so much of the time they're debating words and what that word means and what does it mean in this specific context. And I know people would probably think that is really boring. And let me tell you something. If I was a justice on the Supreme Court, it would get pretty hard for me to keep excited about it. But as you listen to it, you're going, wow, they're taking this word and they really want to know, what does this mean? And what does it mean in this context, in this conversation? And how, when we make a decision and we use these specific words, how is that going to affect how other courts understand this? And so I just think it's really neat. I've been listening. I listen to probably one or two arguments a week if I can find it and find time. Most people think I'm nuts for doing that. Luckily, not too many people would go and watch this video to know that. But anyways, I'm going to get off of here. I just wanted to, on Monday, December 8th, as the Catholic Church is celebrating the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, I just wanted to give you some knowledge and some stuff to think about. And I hope you guys have a blessed day.